We're going to look at the borrowings into Norman French that happened in the years shortly after the conquest. Well, I mean, some of them didn't really stick for 100 years or so, but a few words had already come into English from Norman French before the conquest. Obviously, the two peoples were trading anyway. So the word prison and the word bacon, for instance, very important to have a word for that. The word castle made it across, but in first use, because we didn't actually have any castles over here, it meant village. And it was only when they came over and actually started building some that we got the hint about what they'd been talking about all along. Ginger, pride. So there are a handful. But of course, once they come in and take over and become, you know, the top classes of society, you get an awful lot more. Melvyn Bragg has the lovely turn of phrase that French rained heavily on the English. Surprisingly then, it's a bit odd that, as I say, we end up still speaking English, not a version of French, and that English almost entirely manages to keep hold of its original grammar. We gain very, very little French grammar, and it's just in odd little places. So English word order is all but exactly as it was, and the few examples are ones that English people still struggle with, things like court-martial and attorney general. But a lot of words come in. From 1066 to 1350, as many as 10,000 new words come in. 70% of them are nouns, and we'll see why in a bit, and 3/4 of them are still in use. And they relate to the subjects you'd expect them to relate to, given the people who are bringing them in and what their interests in life are. So it relates to the ruling class, it relates to war, army, archer, soldier, guard, battle, conquest, lance, armour, all those kinds of things. It relates to the social order and the people at the top of it in particular. Throne, court, duke, baron, nobility, peasant, vassal, servant, authority, obedience, labourer. The only exceptions to our nobility being French words are the ones that were already so embedded in English that you couldn't really change them. King and queen, lord and lady were already so embedded. Knight is a weird one because it really should be knecht. And knecht was Old English for boy, and yet somehow still makes it through. And earl, which is obviously related to jarl. Royal is a weird one. Royal comes from the Norman real, which survives in real tennis, real estate, and Real Madrid. Also, things to do with just ways of thinking about the world, that they had new concepts. Not that they followed most of these. Courtesy, honour, damsel, romance, tournament, chivalry, and law and bureaucracy. They brought a lot of their new bureaucratic systems into place. Of course, all the words that come in for those things are Norman words. Felony, arrest, warrant, justice, judge, jury, things like that. Jail is a really weird one because it's the reason why we have two spellings of jail is that it comes over twice. It comes over shortly after the conquest, spelt with the G, and then about 100 years later, it comes over again, spelt with a J. So both versions are Norman French, but Norman French was also evolving in the meanwhile. That's a strange one. A lot of words that relate to food and cooking. Over 500 words, they reckon, that relate to food and cooking come in, presumably because any lord worth his salt will be wanting a cook to mess with new exotic ingredients and either be a Norman French chef or be willing to work with them. So servants have to learn all the fancy words for food. So things like salmon, mackerel, sausages, fruit, vegetable, bleh, grapes, oranges, biscuit, fry, vinegar, herb. Herb's a weird one because if you think about the way the Americans say herb, they say herb. Herb is actually kind of correct because that's how the French would have said it. We added the H and then the Americans dropped it back off again. Or actually, no, quite possibly we added it in since the journey to America. I'm not sure. Olive, mustard, claret, gravy, jelly, boil. Giblet. So gibelet is a game bird stew. There you go. Words for religion. mercy, sermon, charity, nativity. There's one book, Anchor and Rule, which is a guide for aspiring anchoresses, female hermits, and that book alone gives us apocalypse, comfort, discipline, guile, purgatory, virtue, and hypocrite, which they're the first known uses in English of all of those words. Important things to know about, right? So sometimes the new word is needed because it's a whole new concept. There's a whole new set of words, for instance, related to falconry that come in, because the English, although they did do falconry, they weren't nearly as keen on it as the Norman French, so the Norman French brought in a whole new load of words. All of the words for armour, all of that, greaves and cuirasses and all of that, that's all French, because the English didn't go in for that kind of armour. But sometimes there's a sort of head-on fight between an English word and a Norman French word. And sometimes it's a bit odd which one wins. For instance, if you look at our body parts, most straightforward body parts are pre-conquest Anglo-Saxon words. Arm, leg, things like that. Foot, hand. But for some reason, the one simple body part that ends up being French is face, as opposed to the Old English onsein. We do not have an onsein, we have a face. Another example, when it comes to the immediate family, again, these are words that were so ingrained already to people. The simple words tend to stay put because people just kept on using them because those were the words that they knew. So people already had perfectly good words for father and mother and son and daughter, whereas the fancier ones that were probably used less, like niece, nephew, cousin, aunt, uncle, those all come from French. Possibly because the Old English way of doing that was so much more complicated. So, for instance, a nephew was your brother's sonu or your swester sonu, the son of your brother or the son of your sister. So rather than saying that, these new words are going to come in handy. Sometimes we only took half of a word from them, or a prefix or a suffix. So we took the French word disgust, which is déguste, a distaste, but we didn't take gust to mean taste. We took dishevelled, much as my hair is right now, which is déchevel. Your hair is apart, your hair is in a mess, which, fair dibs. But we did not take the word chevelled. Nonchalant, not concerned about, but didn't take chalant, and so on. Some of these words found a use in the language, some of them didn't. That's all there is to it. Best known example of these sort of matched pairs coming into being, where we kept both the Norman word for something and the Old English word for something, but we gave them slightly different meanings. And that's the meat versus the animal. So we kept the word cow, but we also imported the word beef. We kept the word pig, but we also imported pork, bacon and brawn and sausages. We kept the word sheep, but we also imported mutton. We kept calf, but we imported veal. And you can see there what's happened is, in each case, one is the name for the animal for us and the other one is the name for the meat that comes from it. And the simple explanation for that is that the English peasant is looking after the animal, so he needs the word cow, whereas the Norman French chap in his castle needs the word beef because that's what he's eating. It's a little bit more complicated than that, because actually Old English did take on board those French words for a while. So if you asked a peasant in 1400, they would happily have talked about owning a herd of beef for a herd of cows. So we did kind of gain those, but they never quite got the same traction, and then they left again, and we were left with this sort of distinction between the two, which is quite interesting, I think. So what tended to happen was we kept all of our basic words for things because we were just still using them and they were perfectly good words for all of those things. Why would we change them? But we also sort of piled on this added layer of French words, which enriched the language rather than that often replacing things. And in a lot of cases, both of those words survive into English, modern English. And what's fascinating is that we instinctively know which one's which. And I think even if you don't really have a good knowledge of French, which will obviously help you work out which one's which, we still kind of instinctively know because of the way that they are each used in English. So if I say between lawful and legal, which one is from English and which one is from French, or hide and conceal, or start and commence, we know. I think that's really interesting. Freedom and liberty is an interesting one, because freedom, the Anglo-Saxon one, is being freeborn, and therefore able to make your own choices. It's freedom. Freondas are people who are freely able to associate with each other, rather than people who have no choice because of their relationship. So a friend is someone you choose to have a relationship with, rather than someone you have no choice. And that's related to the word, so friond is related to the word for freedom. And you can see usually the Norman French word feels more kind of sophisticated to us. And generally in normal conversation, we prefer to use the Anglo-Saxon word. We would rather have a hearty welcome than a cordial reception. It sounds much more down to earth, doesn't it? Byrne Williams has a lovely quote. "I like the word indolent. It makes my laziness seem classy." Some words end up being a weird hybrid between the two, because we already have part of it and we need to add something else to get another aspect to that. Prefixes and suffixes from one or the other get kept. So for instance, full is Old English. In Beowulf, Grendel's mother is sorrowful. And then we combine that with Norman French words to get things like faithful and beautiful. The full bit is Old English. Conversely, able, to be able to do the thing, is a Norman French addition. And then we add that to an Old English starting point to get something like knowable or doable. There are also words that come in but then shift in their meaning. So danger is a really interesting one. The Old French danger, when it first comes in, means the sovereignty of your lord. You can say, "I am in your danger," which would mean I am under your sovereignty. I am yours to command. And then in the 14th century, that gradually shifts to being, "I am in your danger," would mean you have the power to hurt me. And it doesn't become "you are dangerous to me" until well into the 16th century. Right up until that point, danger means something quite different. As an aside, hazard is also something very different. Hazard starts off, al-azad is a Arabic dice, and it comes in to become a dice game, which then becomes to mean hazarding money, which then, because you gamble on the dice game, which then comes to mean something risky. So both danger and hazard start in very, very different places. Another example of one that shifts, the old French word cloche for a bell, you may still know as a cloche jar, but it doesn't stick for us as being the word for a bell, because we've already got the word bell, so we don't take that on. But we do get from it the word cloak, because a cloak can be bell-shaped, and we get from it the word clock, because the original clocks, of course, all had a bell in them, and the sound was marked out by the sound of the bell, so you would listen for the cloche, and then that became the sound of the, stopped being just the sound and became the entire thing. The entire thing was a cloche. So we end up with all of these extra words for things. In some cases, we've already got a synonym because we've already picked up in a similar way, and I may come back to this at a later time, we've already picked up another word for the same thing from the Vikings, because we did exactly the same thing to a slightly lesser degree, because the languages were more similar to start with, when the Danelaw Vikings settled in this country. So, for instance, the Old English had the word want, and the Vikings brought us the word wish, and then the Normans came in with the word desire. and all of three of those are almost the same meaning. But that's the point, isn't it? A repast and a meal are not quite the same thing. And it's this sort of shading of meanings that we have these very similar, but it's very hard to explain what the difference is, but culturally we kind of sense and know that there is one. And that's what gives English quite the precision and the flexibility and the nuance that it has. And no other language can do quite the same things that we can. No other language has as many words, but that's not just about the words for, you know, very technical things. No other language has as many choices of word for relatively straightforward things, and that allows English to do so many different things. And it's just one of the many categories of why English is quite as weird and wonderful as it is. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again in the near future. Bye bye.